Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week on the podcast, my guest is Terry Rich. Terry joins us to talk about fraud and how to prevent it in an organization or small business. This is something that all businesses really need to monitor and deal with, and Terry has direct experience in it, not because he's technically an expert in fraud, but because he used to run Iowa's lottery and was responsible for rooting out a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme some years ago. Terry also has a lot of interesting experience as an entrepreneur in maintaining creativity and entrepreneurship within organizations, and is a lot of fun to talk to. He and I really had a great conversation today where he shares his experience and his story about running the Iowa lottery, rooting out the fraud, what changes were made afterwards, and lessons he's learned that can be applied to any small or growing organization. I hope you enjoy the discussion as much as I did. Hey, everybody. Real quick before we jump into today's episode, I have been advised by my attorneys to remind you all that none of what you might hear in today or any other episode of Grow Money Business is financial, investing, tax, legal, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and deploy on your own terms. And before you take any actions on what we might cover in the show, I really encourage you to consult with your accountant, attorney, or financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner and think that you might need one, be sure to check out threeoakswealth.com to learn more about my firm's planning, advice, and investment services. I'm live on the podcast this week with Terry Rich. Terry, thank you for joining me.
Nice to be here.
You have quite an interesting career, and I would love to dive into a couple specific points. I know you have a really good story about the Iowa lottery, but this is a podcast about helping business owners align what they're doing in their business with their personal finances. And fraud within small business is a big deal. Could you tell us just a little bit about your background and why that's the case? Why do people steal from the businesses where they work?
Sure. I've had four very distinct careers, all on my own choosing of when I decided to leave. I began on a farm, in a small Iowa farm. Went to Iowa State, going to be a math major, and guy said, "Hey, you can go over here and make a living talking." I thought, that's good. So I got into television, but my first job was in cable television when everybody else was going to broadcast. Everybody laughed. Remember Ted Turner? He was kind of cable before cable was cool. And lo and behold, they said, we can pay you in these things called stock options. We can't pay you a lot of salary. And lo and behold, it worked out all right. When I was 40, we got cashed out. So it was kind of like a Google deal or a Apple. That's where it was really cool. At age 40, I had many of my dreams met financially. And my dad always said, wait till you're 62, you'll have Social Security, and then you're going to be happy. And I realized at that point that happiness really happens on the way to success. And so I realized that the things I enjoyed with that cable company, the entrepreneurialism, the oversight, the things I learned in checks and balances were so important. So I decided to start my own companies. And I started four different companies in the 1990s. And at age 50, again, I checked off another thing in my list that I really wanted to do financially and everything else. And so at 50, I hit midlife crisis. So I decided to do give something back and started as the CEO of the Blank Park Zoo. Now, how many people have you ever had a call and say, would like you to run a zoo? It was the ex-governor who was on a foundation board and said, we're going to take it over because the city's going to losing 600,000. And I said, heck, I grew cattle on the farm. I should be able to grow giraffes at a zoo. So I ran the zoo and we turned it around, cash floated, and ultimately got about a 12, 13, $14 million endowment that will last for years and years to come. Back to savings, I learned something there of having money in the bank. So if there is an emergency, you're able to pay it and not lose everything. Well, at that point, I was the marketing and operations guy. I decided that people like fundraising and construction to take the zoo to the next level. I got a call from the current governor, and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in running the lottery director?" And I thought, well, the zoo is $3.5 million, and this is $350 to $400 million a year. Sounds like fun. So I took over the lottery, and that's where to transition, your question about fraud came into being and the things that we learned.
Where's Blank Park?
Blank Park Zoo is based in Des Moines, Iowa. It's the only accredited zoo in Iowa, which is really important because that means that it conforms to all the Association of Zoo Exhibitors, to do all the right things and take care of the animals.
Wow, so that really solidified your reputation in within the circles to uh, it, w- give you a chance at the next opportunity with the lottery. How the heck did you get your name on the list to run the zoo in the first place? Was
Um,
that engineered?
It was I happened I was just busy and we were having success. I was doing a lot of HBO programming and ESPN, and I'd travel for a weekend and do a live event, come home, and I'd make a lot of money, but I didn't have any assets. And I just ultimately I wanted to be with my kids more, so I just had told a couple of folks that said, "Hey, I'm interested in looking for something new." And they contacted this ex-governor who was in charge. His name was Bob Ray, is in charge of the group that was looking to turn around the zoo. And so I, raised my hand, and with them together, we did some really crazy, fun things financially. But immediately I learned it was easy to do. So going into the lottery was pretty easy because operationally I had the experience. A New York Stock Exchange company was this cable company that I was VP of marketing, an entrepreneur, and you need both of those, I think, in raising money and doing money. So I didn't realize that I would need to be in ethics and finance and trying to crack the largest lottery fraud in U.S. history when it all said and done. I really like to do the promotion, as you may be able to tell.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible journey, and being able to cash out on the stock options at age 40 to give yourself the latitude to explore some of these other endeavors. And I really like how you put it. Happiness is not a destination; it's found on the journey. But you have to have some kind of ability to take those risks and take those steps in the first place. And what a nice deal to be able to come into a bunch of financial wherewithal at age 40.
Well, exactly. And at age 21, I went ahead and accepted this job in cable, and all my buddies were doing broadcast television. They were laughing at us, but we got to help start all these different networks. And also, my risk at that point, if I lost it all, was because I was in the stock. I did learn that stock options, having your 401k in the same, your own company, and then being employed by that, they probably took too much risk. I had some friends that lost a lot of money doing exactly that. So diversification was probably a good lesson looking back. Second thing I learned, when you have the money, I decided when I started the new company as an entrepreneur that I wasn't going to risk the whole thing. I had kids, I had family. I didn't want, so I kind of used a rule of thumb, 10 to 15% of the money that I had, I would use to try new companies. I had all these ideas because Heritage Communications, the cable company, was so entrepreneur. So I bought a radio station and built it and sold it. We started two or three things with that, different companies, and they all tied together to really have fun, but always with the idea, the more successful you are, the less risk sometimes you want to take. You need to, I mean, some people use gambling or they spend their money on alcohol or whatever. My idea was take 10%, and my kind of fixation, because I felt that success with this cable company, was to look ahead and to use that to be as my gambling money, as my money to try something new, because I knew I probably had a better chance of it paying back when it was all said and done. And quite frankly, it did. And that's I still to this day, any money I make, I try to put some aside and what could I do next? What could be fun with that? So that if I do lose it, no big deal. And if you're ever gambling, if you're at the craps table, that's exactly the way you should play. You got to walk away. Too many people reach in their pocket and try to get that next gamble. So going into the lottery, I learned a lot on why people gamble, how people gamble, and also why people create fraud.
So let's dive into that a little bit. Why do people create fraud? Why do people steal resources from the businesses where they're working? And I can come up with a couple answers off the bat. Well, there's cash in the register. I want that cash, so I take the cash. What else is there?
I did a lot of research after I got through this because I don't want anyone, anywhere, anytime to have to go through what I went through mentally and the amount of time that it takes. when you have the doors open that people can steal. And the American Certified Fraud Examiners say there are 3 reasons that people steal that will get you in trouble in internal fraud. Because everybody's worried about external fraud, right? To hacking. Well, internal fraud's equally dangerous. And here are the 3 ideas. One is financial need. Well, everybody would like to have more money, would like to make more money, would like to have a higher salary. But the financial need really kicks in when somebody goes through a divorce, they've got alcoholism, they got gambling problems, they got kids in college, and they just are against the wall of, I need more money. That's the first thing. When that happens, the little devil on the shoulder says, what are you going to do? What are you going to, you got to do something here. You may lose it all. The second is opportunity. And opportunity in this case, it was a big one because, well, let me give you a couple of examples. We all have school districts in our area where you have one business manager, or you might have a church. Church is notorious where Aunt Marge is the secretary, and she's got a gambling problem, financial need, member number one. But she has the opportunity because she writes the purchase orders and she writes the checks. So if you're in a small organization, whether it's your PTO, whether it's your athletic organization, the boosters, whatever, if you've got one person doing both, you're pretty ripe for fraud. And that's exactly what happened and how Eddie Tipton, the gentleman in my story, figured out how to crack the lottery and create this fraud. But even if you've got the opportunity, I mean, as CEOs, most people have the opportunity, and everybody, if you've had any success, want to try to make more money. The third piece of that is really important and is the hardest probably to oversee as the CEO, as an oversight, a board of directors or whatever. That third one is rationalization. At what point does that little devil convince you of, you know what? Here's where it usually happens. It's somebody who's working really hard. The boss doesn't realize they're working all these extra hours. I'm working too hard. I deserve more. In fact, I see that Sally over here or John over here is making more money than I am, and I work just as hard as they do. I deserve more money. And that's where the rationalization is. But if you only have one of those 3 items around you, you probably won't have internal fraud. I mean, I can rationalize, I should make more money than so and so over here, or they're working me too hard. I'm working nights and weekends. But unless I have the opportunity, in other words, if you've got the checks and balances, so in the school case, superintendent has to sign a check before that. You need those checks and balances just so that the little angel over here says, hey, you're not going to get away with this. You better not do that. Or the financial need, if you're doing all right, your spouse is making great money. I don't need it. I'm still mad that John's making more. But those are the 3 combinations that really get you in trouble if all 3 come together.
Sure, sure. Okay. So as I'm sitting here thinking this through, as a business owner, the only one that you can directly control is the opportunity. Your employees and other stakeholders' specific financial needs are not something that you can control, and their own rationalization in their head doesn't appear to me that you can directly control either.
But
So
you
how do you
can
manage against this?
how do you manage against it? I think that even financial need, you can sometimes hear that or see that if you know someone went through a divorce and you hear, I mean, you want to have a hotline or something that any employee can say, this just doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. You got to say something. You've got to have a mechanism for that, whether it's an anonymous tip line. Now, that's not to get everybody fired, but it is to say, I think I would check this or that. And what you can often do, I'll give you opportunity in just a second. The other is rationalization. You also will hear in rationalization, because when you have, at the end of the year, when you have your employee reviews, people say, I need more money. John's making more than I am. How come I'm not making more? You start hearing that. I had a purchasing agent in one of my jobs who was always complaining about different things. I'm thinking, this person is oversight of this organization of millions and millions of dollars. So instead of getting them fired and getting them mad, right away, or having them think I'm accusing them of something, I use the external auditor. And that's a really important. Most people are afraid of external auditors, but I use the external auditor. They always come in before you get started. Says, is there anything we should look at? And I always say, yeah, we've got I think everything's okay, but would you just take a little, so that if they find something, I can say the external auditor found it. It doesn't have to be me prying and getting in people's way. Now you're asking about opportunity. You basically think
Can I interrupt you for just a
sure,
moment?
sure, go ahead.
When you say external auditor, now in the lotto and a public organization like the zoo, I expect you have a lot of external oversight and governing bodies that come in. Are you suggesting that if a regulator comes in from whatever industry we're talking about, and they ask you if there's anything that you're concerned about, that you say, yeah, you might want to go look at John over there. He's been a little disgruntled and just got divorced? Or are we talking about an external auditor where, as part of the risk management process, maybe you pay for somebody to come in and look over your shoulder to
Oh,
provide an
sure.
evaluation of weak points?
Everybody probably has an accountant. If you don't, you're not a very big business and you're probably not real wise. But if you have an accountant, even to say, would you check a few things for me and help me check and verify some numbers, it is probably the best way to handle that. But what's really amazing, this is another statistic from the American Society of Fraud Examiners, is over 40% of all fraud found in any given company is found by employees, outside vendors, and anonymous tips. That's why I always say you want to have something that people have a way to say, hey, would you check this? Because I think they'd feel guilty going to the president and saying, I think you should check Joey over here. But if you've got a way that they can write something down, they probably are more likely, because you want to always have that culture of saying that if something messes up, somebody messes up and we have fraud, that can affect your job and the company's health, your next pay raise, your next bonuses. So, 40%, that's a real key point there, because I always thought we bring the big external auditor in from the state or from whatever, a big corporation, and they're going to audit and I get a clean audit. I'm happy. I'm done. No, no, no. For over 40% that, only 4%, 1/10 of the amount of time does the external auditor find. It's internal audits, the management reviews, those sort of things find most of the internal fraud, and then just having an open culture where somebody can say something if something doesn't feel right.
Sure, sure. Interesting. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about how this played out in the lottery in Iowa.
Yeah, so I'm playing around. It's fun. We're giving away big checks. I gave away over $1 billion while I was a lottery director in Iowa, smaller state. You can imagine a lot of money flowing through. And whenever there's a lot of money flowing, people are always thinking about um, how do you maybe get a little piece of that. Well, this happened one day when I got a call and said we got a winner of this game called Hot Lotto. This is multi-state lottery game where we pool our monies together to get bigger jackpots. And somebody walked into a convenience store, and it was their unlucky day because they, one, bought a ticket in a state, Iowa, which requires you can't be anonymous. There are about 5 or 6 states that do not require you to be anonymous. Number two, that employee was a vendor, which is prohibited to be able to play lottery. They were a vendor, not an Iowa lottery employee, an employee of the vendor. And they walked into a C store, a convenience store that had video, which almost all do today. You can't walk into any place without cameras today, but it also had audio. And only 4 stores of all the stores in our state out of 2,400 have both video and audio. Well, they picked up a ticket, took it, went to their home state of Texas, gave it to a friend, said, "Hey, look, if you would, I like checking out the lottery. Take this, see if it, might win. I don't know, but here's some good numbers." So the guy did, and he took the ticket, and lo and behold, the following week, $16.5 million hit the jackpot. He had a ticket in his hand for $16.5 million. He gave it to his attorney, then gave it to an attorney in New York, then gave it to an attorney in Canada, and this took all of 11 months. And you have 1 year to claim a lottery ticket in our state. At this current time, we just kept barking. We want people to win because the more we have winners, the more people play, right? Every time we got on, people buy more tickets. But we couldn't find anybody. We kept saying, we had people calling and bringing their lawyers in saying, I think I bought it, but the clerk stole it, or my husband's, I think, with the mafia because he's a truck driver and I haven't seen him for 3 months. If he owns that, I get half of it if he comes in and claims it. So we get all these crazy things going on. Well,
And
11 months in.
at this point, that the winning numbers have been issued, but nobody has come forward to claim them.
We know it's been issued. We know that those lottery tickets have so many security features. We know if that ticket either was checked in any convenience store or was put somewhere, whether it's been touched. No one had checked the ticket. It just seemed like it had completely disappeared. So we get a call, and the call said, "Hey, I've got the ticket. I'm in Canada. I'm a retired lawyer. I'm going to send you the ticket. Please send me $16.5 million." This is where the culture comes in within your organization. It doesn't feel right, say something. The person answered the call and said, that doesn't feel right. Hey, let me transfer you on. And
What
so
does not feel right about that call? The fact that it's going to
he doesn't
Canada
want
or
to
that
come
it's an
in. He
attorney?
doesn't want, I don't want any publicity. I just send me my money. Well, we're not going to send money without verifying that he's the one, because we had the video and the audio to tell who bought it. And
Right.
so when it went to security and to our public information officer, they started asking questions. And one of the questions was, what were you wearing? Well, he didn't realize we had cameras and we had video. And he said, I was wearing a flannel outfit. No, it was a guy in a black hoodie, and the guy weighed almost 400 pounds. And this guy said he was 60 some and retired and ill and pretty skinny, all that sort of stuff. Well, ultimately, after he hung up, and they kept saying, "Come on in," and our security folks said, "Let's arrest him as soon as he comes in. That's fraud. That's a Class D felony in our state. We'll just arrest him." Well, he called a couple days later and said, "I told a little fib. It was my client that bought it." Immediately, ding, ding, ding. He now has created fraud because he just admitted he had lied. And so we were ready to arrest him. Well, he didn't show up. He sent the ticket back to New York. And the guy in New York decided to try to come get it. And an hour and a half before the ticket was to expire, ding, 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 it just doesn't feel right, right? Hour and a half when you've held it for a year before the ticket was to expire, he comes in to claim it. He has 2 lawyers in Des Moines he hires to bring in that will receive $500,000 if they can get it cashed. And we immediately go on camera and say, we have the ticket, but we're not going to pay it, because we figured we want to court, because we know if we pay it, we'll never see the money and we'll never see it, be able to get it back. Back and forth wrangling. 3 weeks later, he says, I'm giving it up, just hands us back, says, I'm not claiming it. It's yours. I forfeit the money. Who forfeits 16.5 million annuitized value money? So we opened an investigation with the state DCI, Department of Criminal Investigation, and the Attorney General's office. And they did almost 2 years of research. Couldn't figure out how. We knew it was somebody in New York, and we knew it was somebody in Canada. And then we did find out the trust they tried to claim it for was based in Belize. Ding, 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 just stinks as it gets worse and worse. And that the president of the corporation was the guy in Canada, yet the guy in New York claimed it. So we knew they were connected, but we didn't know how. So it took a lot of time to get everything set so we could go across state borders, do interviews. The Department of Criminal Investigation agents went out. And I hope you never, ever are asked this question when the cops come in. And that is, do you want to be the defendant or do you want to be the witness? Both of them said, I'll be the witness. I'll be the witness. They said they got the ticket from some guy in Kansas, a lawyer in Kansas who had a client named Robert Rhodes. So they went down to try to find Robert Rhodes. Robert Rhodes and his lawyer both could not be found when they went down, when they knew they were coming. So now we're getting almost 3 months away from when the ticket was going to, when the case for us was to expire. So which meant nobody was going to be charged. And we had a new young lawyer come in and they said, you've done everything in trying to find this out except you didn't release the video. Okay, let's release it. So 3 months out before we can, no more charges, everything would have been fine. We kept the money. We sent it back to all the states that had money put into it, and they gave it back out. No harm, no foul, right? Well, they came back in, we released it, and everybody said, wait a minute, that's a guy named Eddie Tipton. Eddie Tipton, oh my gosh, he was the programmer of the computer that drew the lottery numbers for the multi-state lottery, this conglomerate of all the lotteries in the Midwest. Holy smokes, that doesn't sound right. And so they went to talk to Eddie. Eddie was immediately put on suspension by that vendor, which meant they were a vendor for us. And lo and behold, 2 months later, he was arrested. And 6 months after that, he went to court and was found guilty of 2 charges of fraud. We really didn't have smoking gun, but we did know something had to happen because he programmed the computers. He compiled the information for the computers and he maintained the computers. Remember back to our idea of financial need opportunity? He had all the opportunities. He had all the keys of the kingdom. But we couldn't figure out how he did it. But the lawyers did a great job. They found, it didn't only took a couple hours for the jury to find the guy guilty and sentence him to 5 years for each count. And we thought it was over until his lawyer and he made the critical decision, another unlucky decision, to have his brother come up and testify. Well, his brother came up and testified, sat on the stand, Said, that can't be my brother. If you look at the video, he bought 2 hot dogs. My brother don't eat hot dogs. Well, Eddie, if you see the video, is probably 300 to 400-pound dude. And the Associated Press thought immediately, holy smokes, this is a hilarious story. So they put it out on the national wires, and it went back to the brother who was trying to, help his brother who was convicted. It ended up in his, and an FBI agent said, wait a minute, we investigated that guy for money laundering, and we found out he fell out of a tree stand, and ultimately he was in the hospital. And we talked to him. He said that he won the Colorado lottery. Ding, ding, ding. So they called us, and immediately we cross-referenced all lottery winners in America over $600 with every one of their social media contacts. So the people you have in your social media, the people that you have on your cell phone, that's the first place cops go to now, because it's real easy to find. And we immediately found and cross-referenced the 5 jackpots were won by people in their direct contacts. But we still didn't know how he won it. So we ultimately were trying to figure out, and decided to announce once we had Tommy say that, and we checked all the contacts and cross-referenced them. We finally knew that they were all together, and we asked that critical question of the 3 gentlemen, Robert Rhodes in Texas, Eddie and Tommy Tipton, brothers in Texas, but Eddie, who was working in Des Moines, you want to be the witness or do you want to be the defendant? That's when you never want to be asked. And I tell my kids, tell your wife, tell your family, if you're going to do something illegal, do not use your cell phone nor use any kind of social media. Robert Rhodes in Texas gave it, I'm not going to, this is mine. So he went ahead and confessed right away. And all of that gave us a smoking gun to get Tommy and Eddie both to convicted, confessed, and they told us how it was done. We figured out how it was done. And lo and behold, Eddie got up to 25 years. Tommy got, I think, 52 days. And Robert Rhodes got probation with an ankle monitor for a while. So that's the story of the fraud, but how that affected us. What lessons do you learn when one of these things happen? Number one, you got to have checks and balances. Number two, you're going to lose friends. Can you imagine as a financial planner, XYZ Corporation, and you think something's going wrong, and it's somebody within the organization of XYZ, how all of the other agents across the nation are going to say, shut up, do not get in front of the press. And we kept saying, but this is something we need to investigate. You got to make the games fair and honest. If we forget about it, we just pay it. What's going to happen? Somebody's continuing to do that. By pushing it hard, we were able to actually get full confessions and everything with it. But I lost friends. About 50% said you're a villain. 50% said, hey, you did a good job. So that's an important aspect if you're thinking about looking at it. And that's why I always say thank you to the internal auditors. Thank you to the finance department, because when you're filling out your travel reports and you lose a receipt and they're saying we aren't paying it unless you have that receipt, that's part of the checks and balances. That's why you need to do that. And we have to say thank you to them, because they get no credit for keeping your business fair and honest. And so when it's all said and done, they've all been off in prison and some time, and we had the full confession, and we got something called closure. Because to this day, if you do a major crime, whether it's assault or murder, whatever, it's appealed forever, right? And so a lot of friends were saying, this is not going to ever be resolved. They're going to appeal it forever. So you're going to ruin our industry. You're gambling with our $80 billion a year industry. And by having the closure of them all confessing, we were vindicated, right? And we were able to say and somewhat sleep at night. But the hassle that goes through in your mind of whether you're doing the right thing, luckily our governor was always supportive. I helped with the lottery because I said, I want it fair and honest. You spend whatever. So Iowa spent a lot of money, got no money out. They had to pay restitution to the states where they claimed it, in Colorado, Wisconsin, Kansas, and Oklahoma. But the $600,000 that we spent probably to investigate this case came back in huge amounts and multiples, because people knew the lottery was fair. This isn't like playing Malta's poker, over the internet. You can go down and talk to a legislator or somebody about the lottery. And that's why I'm glad lotteries are run by states. So that's a long story, but a crazy story on the $80 billion gamble, how a lottery ticket, 2 hot dogs, and Bigfoot even got involved in and helped solve that largest case.
That is an incredible story, and I have a million questions.
All right,
A
I'll
couple a, cou- a couple of my easy ones are, so clearly, if you're rigging the lottery because you're creating the code that produces the numbers in a way that you draw the winning ticket, that is absolute fraud, no questions asked. The fact that this person, before you knew that, the fact that this person bought a lottery ticket as a vendor at all is not allowed as well, I take it. But what about the fact that you go and buy a ticket at the convenience store and hand it off to somebody else?
that's
Is
fine.
that's fine, right? You're just giving the ticket, but the fact that this person was a vendor and said, "Hey, you take the ticket for me,"
The fact that the
is where
vendor
the issue
bought the
came in.
ticket, if he even if you buy a ticket and give it to your kids can cash lottery tickets in most states. They can't buy them. And that was what the prohibited act was, specifically so that people internally are supposed to be the ones. He was the head of security information, so he's the one that's supposed to be watching for this stuff, and he figured out how to do it himself, and then took advantage of that. Now let's go back to the school and the for instance, or think about your school or your church little organization. Back to that, most people when they first start stealing, I got a gambling problem, I need $5, I need another 20 so I can cover myself, cover the next bet, whatever. They get by with it usually on a couple small ones, but ultimately they can't handle it. They go bigger and bigger and bigger. Eddie got by with it in Colorado 10 years before he tried ours. He got by with it in Wisconsin about 5 years before he tried ours. But he got greedy, and most people do, and he decided to go after the biggest one he could, and that was the one that he programmed this computer to be able to do.
And so in Iowa, the system worked. The 16 million was not paid out. You spent 600 grand or so arguing the case. In Michigan and Colorado, you got away with it. Was there ever any restitution to the state or the constituents?
Good
I
question.
imagine the money was just gone probably by then, right?
Well, they spent it on a lot of different things, and of course, they had shills. This is where Bigfoot came in. Tommy was a Bigfoot hunter, so he had a lot of his friends hunting Bigfoot that he let go claim it, so he didn't have his last name, the same as a programmer, to do that. But Wisconsin, Colorado, Kansas, and the others all uh, got together with us, and so Eddie was found guilty, and all three of them had different restitutions to pay. They've paid a little bit of it, but not much at all. We had no payout, so we didn't get any restitution. We just had the cost of doing the investigation. But let me tell you something. We not only, this was a gamble of $80 billion. We have never sold more lottery tickets after the Eddie Tipton case. Every time we got on and talked about this case, hey, do you have the ticket, or we're investigating or whatever, we sold more tickets. Yeah, and because people are thinking, this must be pretty safe because they're not going to let stuff happen. So I'll go ahead and do it. So it was amazing that we made that $600,000 cost. We probably are taking in 10, $15 million more a year just because of all the publicity and everything that went around it.
Wow. That's wonderful. Now the other thing that comes to mind here is whenever I see a lotto drawn, and I haven't paid too much attention to this over the years, I think of somebody on TV drawing like ping pong balls out of a machine that's blowing them around, where it's totally random. How does the state come to the decision of hiring a vendor to produce a randomly generated number from a computer to using the ping pong balls instead?
Well, the ping pong balls are expensive draws because you've got a producer, TV, all of the different things that go along with drawing balls. Eddie came into the organization right out of the chute and said, maybe we should look at doing this by computer generator, random number generators. And we remember you got states here trying to make the decision. All the state directors were part of the board. And yeah, if we can save money, that's what we want to try to do. So he wrote the code, compiled the code because they didn't have many employees because the state is always strict on number of employees you got helping. And so, they just we didn't have the checks and balances at that point. Obviously, it was changed immediately after this. But it really doesn't matter whether it's a ball draw or a computer draw. If somebody's in charge of everything, They're going to look for ways to do that. Eddie didn't program it that he could just tell you the number every day. He programmed it so it only happened one time a year. It had to be on a certain date, on a certain day. There were 3 dates in a year on a certain day after 8 p.m. and on his machines. He had programmed about 80 different machines sent around the U.S. So he really picked and he didn't do it very often because he didn't want to get caught, but yet he did it. So, but if you look at all the frauds that have happened, billions and billions of lottery draws happen every day. The people that use ping pong balls, we've had frauds there too in Pennsylvania, 1980. They had ping pong balls, and the draw director and one of the talent put latex paint and swished it around on the inside of everything but the twos and fours. Then they played the twos and fours. And so when it happened, those were heavy, and the balls that they wanted would go to the top. Well, the organized crime out there were also using those numbers for their own side bets and saw it, and they called it, and these guys were busted. In Milan, they were using hard, heavy balls like we use for Powerball, and the draw directors would have their nieces or nephews helping, and they did something that seems pretty unique. They just heated the balls, cooled the balls, or put something on the balls and shaved them down to be smooth, the ones they want to draw, and I just told the kids, even though they were blindfolded, pick the hot ones, or something like that. So it can happen anywhere, but I probably know of 5 or 6 out of all the millions, actually billions of draws that happen across the world for lotteries. Very few have happened, and they can happen either balls or these random number generators. Both are important, and what we've talked about from the beginning, it's all the checks and balances. You're making sure that it isn't one person that's doing everything, that you've got 4 or 5 and they're looking at it, and they aren't buddies. You got outside auditors and inside auditors, and you're watching everything, and you don't have the same people all the time. It's just like you want your accounting department to take vacation and have somebody else, pay the bills and do the things, because that's how, if it becomes too comfortable too fast, you're in trouble.
That's right. Yeah. It makes total sense. In the financial industry, we have all sorts of firewalls, not for small firms like myself that kind of focus on, one specific service, but all your big Wall Street brokerage firms that offer investment banking and brokerage. Those are two very different businesses. And if the brokers and salespeople know what's coming down the investment bank sales pipeline, they have a huge incentive and opportunity to cheat. So there are all sorts of safeguards that prevent those two groups of people from communicating in any way, shape, or form. And theoretically, that's supposed to promote efficient markets.
And that is not
always
uncommon. In fact, we could talk about anything that has to do with money, and we could talk about, we could theorize how could we steal money,
So when did this? When was the fraud uncovered? When was all this going on?
Fraud happened. Our fraud, the first one started in 2005. We discovered ours in 2010, I believe it was, and ultimately Eddie went to prison about 2018, 19. And I think he's about to get out. They actually, with good behavior, he'll only be in for 5 years. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't want to be in prison for any days, especially during COVID. So, I think he served his time. Parole board lets him out. That's fine. We stopped it and corrected, had the multi-state lottery help correct the checks and balances.
After the fraud was uncovered and argued and the state of Iowa prevailed, what changes were made to the program? You're successful in rooting all this out. What happened next?
That's pretty easy. Somebody else now writes the code. A second person it compiles and then sends it to a third party, who then tears the code completely apart and makes sure there's nothing weird in that. And then another person does the oversight of the draws, of how it's done, because you may think in a random number you have to hit a button, and some people do it the third time is when you get your numbers, or the fifth time. Well, if the person who programs it knows that and they have the program, they could do that. But you try to put as many variables in it as possible. The biggest variable, I think, is like a Powerball. Let's just take that as an example. When you walk in, you buy the random pick. There's a random number generator in every different machine that gives you your numbers. But when it's drawn, you're using balls, which is a whole different variable. And there are six, I don't know, a whole bunch of sets of balls that coins are flipped, auditors are looked at. They never use the same thing either way. They update it all the time. And all of those variables just make it virtually impossible. What Eddie did, because he changed the code, he knew what he could predict what the numbers was because he also oversaw the service. So he knew how many pre-draws they do and where they are. So he knew where to go on the string to get the right numbers. So he played it with a manual pick, and when it came up, it was there.
I see. Okay. Are you still with the lottery now? What are you
Nope,
up to
I
these days?
retired from the lottery. I'm on the road. I've been doing a lot of public speaking, keynotes on. I do a lot of banks just to say, checks and balances. Don't go through what we have, and and I tell people all the time, don't cuss the finance department or the accounting department when you have to do a triplicate of this or that. It can get overboard, but that's important because if you have major fraud within your organization, you're going to lose reputation, you're going to lose money, and you may lose your job anyway. So it's not worth it. So I do those speeches I retired a couple of years ago.
Are you allowed to play the lottery now? Do you play the lotto?
Hey, here's a good one. So I can play the lotto now. And I was in on all the discussions of how he did it, why he did it, and all those sort of things. But just to show you the checks and balances, I've played Powerball and I've played Mega Millions a few times, especially when the jackpot gets high. And I think I've won all of $4 or $8 over the last 2 years. Now, if I
Well,
win
it's
the big one
probably
by
probably
chance,
better than
I
the
always,
odds of buying a ticket,
yeah,
right?
I always buy the quick pick so that there's never, if I were to win, I could say I didn't pick the numbers. It wasn't like I knew the numbers, but chances, as you know, are millions to one. But it's the dream that people look for. Gambling in casinos is more of an experience, a social aspect of sitting by. You see a lot of senior citizens. It's the ding, 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 and all the excitement of the social. Lotteries are more aspirational. That what would happen if I won $1 million? And that's kind of the draw the lotteries have. Now, their scratch tickets are more like the slot machines and the ding, ding, ding. You'll see people who like that kind of gambling will do that. But all of it goes to great organizations. But do know that most lotteries have a 25% profit margin, as do all of that, which means that only 75% of the money is paid back and put in different areas. So your chances are probably low. But if you got a few dollars, if you got pop cans you're taking back, whatever, for redemption, that's how to play. Back to our thought of taking a percentage of what you have. Don't bet the whole farm. Just bet something, have some fun with it. And if you lose it, okay, it was entertainment.
A couple episodes ago, we had a a really good guest on who's an economist, and he's like a really prolific economist. Ran for president a few years ago. He's at Boston University, educated at Harvard. He's been in front of Congress a couple dozen times, and he wrote a book on personal finance from his perspective as an economist, and kind of waylaid a lot of conventional wisdom. And one of the pieces of conventional wisdom that's crammed down my throat over the years in all my financial
Mm-hmm.
planner trading is everybody has a capacity to take risk. And the more money that you have, the more risk you have the capacity to take with it because you can afford to lose more of it and maintain an adequate lifestyle. And his point was that if you're on the high end of the wealth spectrum, you should be taking less risk because you have a lot more to lose. But if you're near destitute, you ought to be playing the lotto because you have nothing to lose. You're already destitute, and you may as well be aspirational and shoot for some huge
Yeah.
payday. There's no sense, sticking a whole bunch of money in bonds because you don't have capacity to lose. You don't have anything to lose in that situation.
Sure. I'm a little, and as a lottery director, everybody thinks I could have doubled the profit margin, or not the profits, but the profits and the revenue of the lottery there. But you got to be careful. You don't overpromise or overcommit. But I had a really good session with my kids. I'd heard about it. A couple people changed, and I took all three of my kids to the Dave Ramsey course. And his bit
Hmm.
of having $1,000 in reserve fund or some monies in reserve fund, and pay yourself first if you have a car, flat tire or whatever. You can't just be completely desolate and frantic of what you might do, because then you may do something crazy. Pay yourself first, then work with the credit cards and all that. But My dad came up through the Depression, so I pay my bill off. I've always paid my credit cards the day that I get it. I've never had a credit card finance charge. If I can't afford something, I don't do it. And when I gamble or when I do anything like this, start a new business, I don't bet the farm. Again, I take a percentage, and then I do play with that. But I don't. I don't think taking 50% of it is the way to go either. Or even
Yeah.
rolling the bankroll. If you've got a really good idea, that's when I think you also use other people's money. That's where you take the risk. You go to the bank and try to get it financed so that they help you do it. Don't take all of your cash. Set up a corporation so that it's set up underneath that, or an LLC or an S corp, and start it. But yeah, you got to be able to sleep at night, and that's the big thing. But I'm telling you, when you start a business, I had so much fun starting businesses and selling businesses. When you start one and it's successful, that's the greatest high. That's better than winning anything on the craps table, and that's better. I've never used cocaine or heroin or any of the other big drugs like that. It's just as addictive, though.
I concur. And your odds are a lot better than the lotto or the craps table, to be totally honest. I mean, and you hear, yeah, you hear
Well, it's
about the,
because you believe in yourself. You're putting your hands in whoever you're doing with gambling and their structure, which is a guaranteed loss if you put everybody combined. If you've got the heart and the soul, the key is having good people around you. You still have to have a good tax person. You got to have a good accountant. You got to have a good lawyer. And hopefully, initially, it's on an advisory with them, hoping that if you do well, then you'll pay them to do a lot more. And you get an advisory board together. And because most entrepreneurs, in my mind, aren't obviously actually good managers, they're great idea people and the big scope of things of new ideas. But I like to surround myself with good people who help me because I'm awful with details. You give me a chance, I'll give you 100 ideas in 5 minutes. That's what I love to do.
that's an excellent point. You made a point a minute ago about taking on money from investors, and that's interesting perspective. I have a slightly different opinion on that, and that's that, if you have a great idea and you want to scale it, by all means, go and take money from investors. You get to utilize sometimes their networks and their expertise, which is really helpful. The moment you take money from investors, you have
New
a
bosses.
different degree of pressure on you,
That's
though.
right. New bosses.
Their intentions are not always aligned with yours, and they will
Yeah.
push you in directions you might not want to go. And
Yeah.
that's a heavy deal, taking on money
You're
from
you're right.
investors. For
My
everybody
law
out
is
there
to take
listening,
as few of additional people as you can. So you're better off to pay someone and not have them as part of it, but maybe give them upsides if you have success. But you want to make the ultimate, but you got to listen to them
yeah,
too because a good lawyer will keep you out of trouble.
that's right. That's absolutely right. Now, this concept is something I wanted to ask you about too. You've been through a lot of entrepreneurial experiences in your career. One of the things that is kind of common in a growing organization is, if you think about the concept of scaling up, you really want to have an operating manual for everything that happens in the business, right? And every single thing that's done more than once, there's a script, so you can just hire somebody, put them in that seat, and here's the operating manual. Now you go and do it. But the more that you put those, I'm going to use a pejorative term, shackles on people in those seats, the less entrepreneurial spirit you have, the less creativity you have as an organization. You've been through the cycle a number of times. How do you preserve that kind of entrepreneurial spirit and creativity
I
in
think
a
you got to
growing
rely,
organization?
yeah. I think you got to rely on your finance, accounting, and the lawyers. They're what I call the no mans. They're the ones that will always say, "No, man, you haven't thought about this. We don't have the money. You could get sued." That sort of thing. And I keep myself. I've always been on the other side. I don't want a book. I want to do things that no one ever has done. We did, and that's where the cable television business was so fun. We couldn't touch anything that didn't turn to gold. So you were incented or you were advised, and we'd screw up here and there, but we were making so much on all this other stuff that we could take those kinds of chances. So I like, if I'm an entrepreneur, I want to keep pushing the ideas, and then as they develop, hire somebody to manage it and get that particular phase of it going while I'm over here trying to look for something new. But there's always a better way to do something. I'll give you a crazy example. Everybody thinks it's all money, but it's also expenses. I went to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and stayed in a hotel, and I went in. On the back of the stool was a box, and it had a hole in the middle. And it said waste reducing exfoliating cleanser, and I'm thinking, what is this? And I thought, those darn accountants. They figured out that when you go in and stay in a hotel, you have a bar of soap, you only use about that much around the outside. You don't use the middle. They just throw it away. So let's take the middle out and let's put that on the sink. And now they've just saved 50% on their operating expenses.
That's right.
Brilliant. Now that's innovative for people that you wouldn't think about being innovative.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. There's all sorts of things like that. And so what I hear you saying here is you and your personal preference as you grow and have grown these various businesses is delegate as much as you can so that you can preserve your role as the idea man.
Yep.
That's in your DNA. I can tell just talking to you that that's where you thrive and what you really enjoy doing. The other stuff, you just find other ways to get it off of your plate day to day.
Here's the hard part, though. I mean, I get asked as I do podcasts or interviews or if I do my speeches around the world, if you were 21 again, what would you advise someone? Give us two things. And the first one I would say, when you go into any organization and any meeting, you always raise your hand when somebody says, "Hey, we need somebody to do something." And the reason I did that is because you become noticed. You know, when no one wants to clean the toilets, who's, we don't have so and so here today. Who can clean the toilets? I do it. You're going to be noticed. You're going to get promoted. The second is I wish I'd learned how to relax, to find some time to break away and relax. Because when you have the success, I'm on this adrenaline, always looking. Every time I talk is, how can I multitask it? Every time I go to the grocery store, I did it in 3 minutes and 28 seconds. Can I do it in 3:27? Or can I meet this goal or can I hit that goal? Damon John, who's part of the Shark Tank group, and I did a podcast with him for a company, and he came up with something. So at my old age, I just amazed why I never thought of it. He said that at night, he's really successful, and everybody, of course, then is yanking on him, picking at him. I got an idea. I got $1 million idea. Help me out. Help me out. He said every night he has a list that's in his pocket. And he looks at it, he revises a little bit. The next morning he wakes up and revises again. And that list is not, how do I make the next million? The list is, I want to do 6 or 7 things for me today. And so he wakes up, maybe I'm going to eat Cheerios this morning because I haven't had those forever. Or maybe it's that, so that he has something rewarding that he can do. And you get the self-worth, because so many people burn out or they can't keep the goal of all the success that they've had. And I really respected hearing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that. I don't do that exact thing, but I've got a morning routine. And it's a result of reading The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod recently. Is that something that's come across your desk at all?
Nope, haven't read it.
It's the idea of,
Let's
so I've got
let's go
3
back.
kids.
Let's go back just a second. I've read one book since I graduated from high school.
You've read one book since you graduated from high
I
school?
do everything visually, and it's the old story of Henry Ford, who was on trial because they thought he was stupid. They wanted to kick him off the board or be president. This is a story as I hear it, but it relates to me. And he said, "Hell, I can pay any kid a nickel to go to the library and find that out. My job is to create new ideas." And that's been kind of a mantra I've had. Am I embarrassed I don't read more? Probably, but I keep up to date via television, via newspapers on the basics. I want top level management recaps of
Executive
what that's
summaries.
going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
How
sure.
about
You
that
shouldn't
for
be
a story?
embarrassed about
Yeah,
that.
you
I
may
mean,
not.
it's one medium. I like that medium personally, but
Well, it's relaxing
that's
to most.
that's incredible. I've never heard anybody say anything remotely close to what you just said, and that's refreshing. It's great to hear.
Well, who knows? It's like, how many people ever learn typing and on a typewriter anymore? No, we're doing things so much differently than we did, growing up, because you don't need it. You got computers and computations that can be done.
That's right. That's right. The Miracle Morning that I mentioned a
Okay, go
moment
ahead. Yeah.
ago is so I've got 3 kids, 5, 3, and 1, and my brain, and I'm trying to maintain and grow our financial planning firm. Everything's going well. Everything's going well at home. Our kids are wonderful, but I've got brain overload 100% of the time, and I've kind of known that for years that meditation would benefit me. I just haven't ever really explored that. And so the Miracle Morning it's a really quick read, but it's a guy who's overcome a lot of adversity in his life and basically created a morning routine where every morning he gets up early, he meditates for a few minutes, he does a few affirmations that are related to objectives that he has personally. He does some visualization, he reads, he exercises, and he journals. And I don't have a morning routine that is exactly that, but I get up every morning at 5:30 now as a result of this. I've tried it for about 6 weeks. It's really been very helpful. And I meditate, affirmations, visualize, a little bit of journaling, and I exercise vigorously every morning. And just getting your brain in the right mindset and clearing out a lot of the
Yep.
garbage is kind of like a productivity hack. And so it's not, writing a list of 6 or 7 things that I want to accomplish the next day personally and then, running down the list, but it helps me identify what the 6 or 7 things that should be on that list are in the first place.
Yeah. Well, you can tell my personality is more of I'd rather just give you 100 ideas and walk away and say I may have contributed to someone, whether they work or not. I'll wrap. I think we're getting closer. I want to wrap up with a old quote that I really like. Failure is the first step to success. I learned this from my grandkid. She came over, she's about a year and a half, pulled herself up on the couch, took a step, and what happened? Boom, she fell. She lost. She failed. But what'd she do? She pulled herself back over, stood up, walked 2 steps, and boom, fell again. This happened 5 or 6 times, and of course now she's walking all over the place. I had my first failure coming out of college. I was in the cable company, and I was doing some on-camera work, and I looked up and I didn't have the 5 o'clock shadow. So I decided to write to Gillette and tell them that they had the greatest razor ever. So I sat down and typed up the letter, realizing in 2 weeks I would be able to come back and go out and do a national commercial in New York. So I thought about during those 2 weeks, what you may feel like if you're playing Mega Millions or Powerball. What if I could go do that national? You know what? 2 weeks to the day, I get the letter back and said, "Dear Mr. Rich, we appreciate your letter, but you wrote the wrong company. You need to write Schick or Gillette, whichever one I wrote. I wrote the wrong one." But the excitement that I had in that failure, how many times have you failed? I think about my granddaughter taking 5 times or 10 times to walk. How many times have you had an idea and you failed and didn't do it? That failure, because I wanted to be on TV, took me all the way to the time that I was in the cable business and my hometown wanted to do a promotion. I did a promotion and ultimately ended up on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, did national television, 20 million homes as a panel guest on the Tonight Show. Following that, I've done every major network, every major cable world, all because I failed. I failed that one time, but picked up and tried it again. And so that's kind of the lesson I would give, because I get a lot of people say, "Geez, you're successful. Have you ever screwed up?" Yeah, that's for sure. So happiness happens on the way to success, and failure is the first step to success, is how I would leave you.
That's a wonderful note to end on, Terry. And thanks again for sparing a little bit of your time to tell your story and join me here on the show. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Now you have a website.
Sure.
Let's say we have somebody out there who's holding a conference they need a keynote speaker for. How can people come find you?
Yeah. I do all this from Iowa. I've always lived here. I've traveled the world. So, it's kind of crazy. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But my website is pretty easy. terryspeaks.com. terryspeaks.com. That'll have contact information. I've got a book on innovation and a book on the Eddie Tipton story that you heard about, the lottery fraud. More than anything, I hope everybody maybe got one little nugget of idea that'll take them to the next level also. That's my goal in life.
There's more than one nugget that you've dropped today. So thank you again, and look forward to chatting again with you here soon.
You got it.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.